Interview with David F. Page of 1635 Boynton Drive, Lansing, Michigan, 48917. Dave's phone number is area code 517-321-3572. The interview was conducted on February 4th, 1992 by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River. This is tape number 1 of 2 tapes. Dave, why don't you start with your name and address, if you would, for us, please?
Hey, this is Dave Page. I live at 1635 Boynton Drive, Lansing, 48917.
What's your phone number over there, Dave?
My phone number, of course, is area code 517, and the number is 321-3572.
Then if you could just take us back to kind of the beginning and how you got started.
Okay. Well, I joined Oldsmobile in July of 1953. And up till that time, I was in the Air Force at Dayton, Ohio, at the Research Center as a senior project engineer in crew station design at Wright-Patterson Field. I got a call during the week, probably the front part of July, to come up and interview with Bob Cook, who ultimately hired me in the inspection department, as it was then called. And eventually, after a series of assignments, I was assigned to central inspection in first the assembly plant up on the second floor, and then ultimately over to building 19. And that's where I was up until the time I went to product engineering, which was in 1959. I was summoned to product engineering to start my career over there in engineering, which I was a graduate engineer and therefore wanted to.
What were you doing out in 19? What were your tasks out there?
Well, I was the manager of central inspection, central reliability now.
Well, what did they do there?
Well, the kind of things we did is we sampled incoming shipments of products for the final assembly plant, such as steering gear assemblies. We would dissect them. We would see if there were any problems, if they met certain criteria, and then we would release the shipment to production.
So everything that came in had to, in essence, pass central
inspection, right. Or at least the biggest sampling, whatever it dictated. Now, in the case of Detroit Transmissions, they came in on a daily basis, and I remember during some snowstorms, we had to stop production, I believe, as I remember it, because we didn't have a truck hadn't arrived yet due to the bad weather. So that happened, but we were talk about what is now called just-in-time delivery.
Yeah.
We were very tight with Detroit Transmissions on a couple of occasions. And so you might say that one of my thoughts back in those production days on the production line was that we reached, I believe, a total of approximately 123 cars per hour, which was considered the fastest automotive production line in the world.
Maybe one shift.
One shift. And we obtained excellent quality during that fast pace. And during that time, I remember building a car for one of the governors of Michigan, Oldsmobile, just like our present governor. And we did that on occasion. So we built some special cars during that time. And
did they get special treatment as they went down the line?
Well, they were taken offline, of course, and were gone over by a lot of people. We certainly didn't want to give a governor because he's advertising for Oldsmobile. So we wanted to ensure, and our people could be assured that it was right. So we had, of course, it was, like I say, it was built right on the line, though, just like any normal car, but then was taken off the line to be road driven and so forth.
Lots of inspection.
Lots of inspection processes. And trying to think, Of course, the assembly plant has grown to such leaps and bounds in succeeding years. And I remember Haile Selassie coming to visit, as well as a couple of governors. He came to visit Oldsmobile, Patty Page, the singer.
Were those kind of big events, so to
Big
speak?
events, oh yes. Well, nothing except that they were escorted through the production processes. And of course, we had to be sure our house cleaning was right and all little things like that.
Yeah.
And, but we were aware that they were coming through.
So it wasn't a surprise.
It wasn't a complete surprise. And of course, safety was a thing that we always had to be sure that as they walked in on those lines that there wasn't a mishap. So we had to be sure of the safety not only of our own employees, but also the visitors who wouldn't be familiar with those things. And there were many others, but we had famous people come through the plant
When
during
somebody like Patty Page would come through, Dave, would the people just kind of line the aisle to see her, or how would they?
Oh, no, they kept right on working.
They kept right on?
Oh, yes. I don't know of an occasion where we really stood along and watched this thing happen.
Okay.
No, all the people, including the supervision and the hourly people, were all working at their jobs.
All right.
And down in the pits as well as above. And so things went on as normal, really,
Okay.
when these people came through.
See, Dave, you had mentioned that you had gone to school out in Michigan State.
Yes. My real first recollection, and maybe what drew me to Oldsmobile ultimately, was an occasion when I was in my senior year in the engineering school at MSU. I had the opportunity in the R.E. Olds building out there, the engineering building, of meeting Mr. Bowles. And I knew he was a great man and a famous one and all that. And I think possibly I told you I didn't wash my hand for a week. But I knew, and I had a nice little chat with him, and I told him that about my previous with my grandfather in a buggy company down in Marshall, which he used to call on, my grandfather.
Did he, by any chance, remember that?
I don't think he did. It was about a year before he died, and I don't think he recalled that, as I remember. Oh, yes, he was in his 80s. And, but of course, I did tell him I had gone to the school here, and ultimately, of course, I ended up being at Oldsmobile.
Did he have any words of wisdom for you?
Keep working hard.
Okay.
And I might say that really, I had 34 and a half years, and I'll continue on, 34 and a half years at Oldsmobile, and something I captured a phrase here, Oldsmobile's tradition throughout that 40 or 34 years was intense pride and togetherness. We were a close-knit family.
Were we different than other places that you went to, Dave, over those years?
I don't think another division, and I've been to all of them, had quite the same esprit de corps as Oldsmobile had. I really don't. And talking with their people, I never got that they had that, had the esprit de corps. I do know this, that in my years at product engineering, our closest rival was Buick.
Interesting.
And Pontiac. We had to be the most secretive with those people than we did if somebody from Ford coming into product engineering, visitors, for instance. And that's just the way it was.
Do you have any inkle to why that happened, why that esprit de corps existed?
Well, I think it's because the main, Oldsmobile's working population, I still think it's true, is drawn from the surrounding communities. Many are farmers. And I think that in the big cities like Detroit and so forth, that you don't get to know people very well on a first name basis. And these people, would have picnics together. They had vacations together. And so they got to know one another very, very well. And I think it was due to that, due to the people. And the people make any organization. The people are the most important product. And they made Oldsmobile, and everything I'm going to say today, I want to say in the spirit that everybody contributed to Oldsmobile's greatness, have and hopefully still are. So.
But that was an obvious thing that you saw as a new person.
Yes, as a new person, and in the years to come, I could see that. It was I don't know, maybe there's undoubtedly other reasons that happened, but I can quickly say that. And
Okay, so you then from central inspection, you went to product,
I went to product in 1959
all right?
to product engineering, and I worked for Elgin Neff.
Now, is that where you kind of wanted to go?
Yes, right. Well, I wanted to get into something that was directly connected with engineering. Now, at the time I joined Oldsmobile, the thought was to get graduate engineers in on the production line.
Was that a kind of a new happenstance?
I think it was fairly new. I wasn't the first, but there was Bill Slacka and some other people, Bob Truxell, I think were on the very cutting edge of that. And there were a lot behind me. Doug Tracy, for instance. I remember when he was a tech student coming into product or into the plant. So that was a move, and I was one of those, and that's how I started in, and I worked directly for Bob Cook. And then for others, another person I worked for was Al Lenz over in Central Inspection. He had the responsibility for Central Inspection, and we had many, many good times with Al Lenz. And some of the other people that I knew. But I went into product engineering because there was an opportunity to work strictly in the engineering phase. And that's what my training was, and I had great opportunities. And I've had some wonderful experiences in my 34 years. Oh, I might mention before I left manufacturing, I was given an assignment. At that time, Hydromatic transmissions had a field problem with the setting of the linkage down to the transmission, and it would cause rough transmissions. And the dealers were hollering and everything. I ended up traveling out to the dealers, but a fellow by the name who's still at the plant by the name of Mel Hammond and I designed a tool that would measure the transmission pressure. And it was so consistent, you could set the transmission set up by feel, because everybody had a different feel for the way it was designed, the bell crank and the pin that had to pass by this place. It would differ between individuals and on the line and so forth, and it never could be consistently. But the idea here was, and I think that at the time Jack Wolfram authorized some money for us to do this, a project, if you will, and we ended up making several dozens of these transmission setting devices that went out to dealers and the at that time the BOP plants, so that they could consistently set the linkage. And it was kind of a foolproof way of doing it.
It worked off of
the pressure in the transmission. Mm-hmm. And that's where I first started working with Andy Watt, who was the transmission engineer at the time.
This all kind of happened right after you came over to product?
No, this happened just before I came over in '59. And that was a project that I think turned very successful. We definitely, the field problem in that area of complaint dropped right out of the picture. And it made a happier customer.
Sure.
And because that was contributing to rough transmissions, conceivably other problems. But that definitely cleared that problem up.
See, Dave, you had mentioned you had done some work with the earlier work with the transmission fire thing.
Yes. Oh, yes. I'm glad you reminded me of this.
Early 50s.
In the early 50s, when I
Must have been like 53, maybe.
I have to believe it was because I started in 53, and I think within 6 months that fire occurred.
Yeah.
Well, I was given the assignment to help develop the inspection of the transmission line. Oldsmobile decided to be one of the contributors. See, the decision at General Motors headquarters was that we had to get into production of a transmission and hurry. They'd like to think 30 days from the time of that fire. So I don't know whether we made it or didn't, but anyway, I spent many a day going down to Detroit Transmission. In fact, on a couple of visits, the first one especially, it was still smoldering down there in Detroit. I looked out a window, and it came right up to where they had these prints in boxes by part number. Nothing was on microfilm in those days, and that's another story. But anyway, everything was by prints, and you had to fumble through these prints to get the ones that Oldsmobile would want for their part of that transmission build. So here I was rummaging through burnt prints. Many of them reeked of smoke and everything. And I'd always heard the story that the Willow Run plant was, the day that was still burning, was leased to General Motors. So they knew that's where they were going to do it, the final assembly of the transmission, like it was done there in Ypsilanti, and which wasn't very far away. But then these other divisions, Buick, and I don't know who all the other divisions were, I've forgotten that. But anyway, we all had to contribute certain parts. I think ours was a cover, a Taurus cover, was one of the products we had to come up with. And so, and I ended up, and of course at that time, they had to build Oldsmobiles with synchromesh transmissions. Buick synchromesh transmissions, as I remember. And in order to have a car to go to Detroit in, I was given one of those cars, brand new synchromesh. And I remember the devil of a time I had on 8 Mile Road at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Detroit, which is a massive traffic. And here I am trying to shift and not downshift if I could help it down into first, because it was so hard to get it into first until they broke in. But all those cars and that we had to build with a synchromesh transmission.
Now the Dynaflow came along.
The Dynaflow came along, yes. Yeah. Finally, they got Buick to up their production, and that took some doing to do, to allow Oldsmobile to have some Dynaflow. But we did build them with Dynaflow. But I wasn't fortunate enough to have one when I was doing the Detroit bit, part of that program.
So the corporation really took the components and spread them around
to the different car divisions.
Manufacturing various pieces. Parts.
And I'd go to Willow Run, and they put it together for final assembly.
Okay.
So their job, of course, was to make the Willow Run plant be able to accept. And I remember going down there to Willow Run plant 2 and seeing that place within a matter of 30 days just full of manufacturing technology and machines and testing. Yeah. And I do know, I don't think we were too far from that 30 days, and it may be less or more. I'm not sure which it was, but we had a mandate and we pretty well met it. As far as I know, we did. And we had to deliver Taurus covers plus some other parts, some other things. And I had a small part in that, and that we had to set up in a hurried length of time. And first of all, we had to have the prints of those parts, which Detroit Transmission had, and it was a good old fold kind of prints. And I want to mention this, that when I went over to product engineering, the technology that has developed in just prints is phenomenal. I used to have 6 clerks in product engineering that did nothing but full prints all day long.
Because that was the media we dealt with.
That's the media we dealt with, the same idea. But when an engineer wanted to print, he had to find it in the file by going through the numbers. And if it wasn't there, if it was out on the floor being, now these are in days since that fire, of course, in other parts of engineering prototype cars, it was a constant, who has the print? And some people would put a note in there, I have taken this print, so-and-so. Others we never knew, so it was a constant haggle.
Disappeared, right?
So we had to get another print. And eventually microfilming came in. It was a godsend. Believe me, it was a godsend. It had to be all over automotive making because everybody else had to do the same thing, full prints, like maps of Michigan.
Time frame wise, Dave, about when did you got a feel for?
Well, I'm thinking I got over there in 59. I would say the early 80s. That technology,
really?
Yeah.
That late?
Yeah, and it could have been past that, but I'm thinking it was the early 80s. I think so.
Okay.
And I went over in 59, and no, wait a minute, I'm missing a date. Yes, I'm missing a date. I went over in 59. I would say it was in the 60s.
Okay.
In the 60s, yeah, early 60s, maybe the latter half of 60s. I'm sorry, in the 60s. Please excuse me.
It's all right.
Yes, and that definitely has since Because when you're missing a card, you can't find it, a micro, you just ask for a new print and they zoom, 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 and you another pack of cards. And our receiving inspection, which I had a part of.
This is product receiving.
Product receiving,
Okay.
that receive the production parts have the same problem. They just order a new pack of prints and they get it all new. Within a matter of minutes, you can get another, in a short length of time, you can get another pack of prints. And it saved all these filing. Because you can imagine if you missed a print, what it is to go back into a file and finger through things. And there are one incident's popping into my mind before I leave production. One year, we were popping the wheel bolts through the spiders of the wheels.
Actually
pulling through when they torqued them.
Right,
yes, and we were frantic to find out because we checked the wheel hardness. We called Motor Wheel, who was one of our vendors, and for their and they course and the bolts we checked. The bolts have a tremendous amount of pressure on them. They're beveled, shall I say beveled, and they have a tremendous friction force against the sides of that wheel spider. And here we had to put all the cars out in the lot for a few hours and we didn't have an answer after several hours. Well, I went over to product engineering and there's a man there that I cannot come up with his name right at the moment. But anyway, he heard the problem. He said, go back and check the guy, if you're doing anything, is anybody putting any grease on those spider itself or the nut? Well, we had a relief man. Somebody took a vacation that did that job, and we found out that the fellow putting on the lubrication also put it on the either the nut or the wheel bevel, and they were pulling right on through, and we didn't know why.
Because there was just no friction there.
There was no friction. They eliminated the friction. And it goes on the nut only, or on the threaded portion of the bowl, I should say, the wheel bowl. But not in the area. That is absolutely a no, and it is today. It is today.
Because you can't get the right torque.
You cannot get the right torque, or what you will do is just force that nut, tons of pressure, by the way. And especially with air guns and so forth, right? And it just pulls it right through. So that was one thing I remember, and I remember product engineering. Gee, they had an answer that, in a way, helped me out a great deal to be able to get that back to the production line.
One of the problems of the day.
One of the problems of the day, and we had cars stacked up out in the yard, probably a day's production, that we had to go back and change all the wheels and nuts and get that word out. Of course, to dealers, and no grease on either of those two parts, and that holds today. But they're more cognizant of it today. But that was it wasn't George Ritz. There's another man, and I just can't, I want to give him credit for that. And I can see him, but I can't, the name's not coming right at the moment, but I'll get back with you, Jim. Anyway, back over to product engineering in '59, and I worked for Elgin F as a supervisor in the experimental assembly department, and they had the responsibility of all prototypes, all new cars, building them for the engineers, and so they could test them on the proving grounds as well as photography and everything. So I went through years of that. Finally,
you were the supervisor of the guys doing the work there.
Other guys doing the work.
Okay.
I had, I'm going to say 100 skilled tradesmen, auto mechanics at that time.
Okay.
We built engines, transmissions.
Oh, wow. You did all that work.
All the work. We sometimes bought parts like Saginaw Steering Gear Division. Due to their expertise and things, we would buy prototype parts from them directly. There were a few like that. And parking brake cables are kind of a specialized items. I mean, you can't fool around with things like that, trying to prototype. But so the decision was to go out and buy those, which we did. Eventually, I worked up as superintendent of the shops and of the entire shops. That would be product engineering, general superintendent of the shop area. Okay, that would include sheet metal department, machine shop, the experimental garage, wood model shop. And I think that's, and the, all the, well, this was at a different time, the storage areas and so forth.
Okay.
And so anyway, during the course of this period of time, of course, I met a lot of people from other divisions and traveled to and so forth.
When you first went over there, Dave, you were over in Old Building 64?
Old Building 64.
Where were most of these activities?
Now, that was down, at that time in 59, that was down on the first floor of Building 64. We've since moved up to the second floor of product engineering, 64. Then along came the new building. They had to expand, needed more area to 66. And I can remember them digging the hole for that and wish they'd have made it bigger, but and had the full basement underneath there. We lived later to regret that, but because we had storage problems eventually and had to go off site to do it. But, and that was a big thing to move department after department, all the drafting rooms, but my part of it was to move the shop areas over to the new building to provide, you know, in the design of the building. And that was
like your machine shop, Dave. What kinds of things could you do in the machine shop?
the machine shop had the talent and ability to practically do everything. Anything you could think of. We had
an engine from scratch.
Engine from scratch, from virtually everything. We might buy bearings, but we would make pistons and connecting rods, virtually, and assemble. And I'll tell you about the Quad 4 a little later on. And but virtually everything. The sheet metal shop could do anything to bend a piece of metal.
How did they form it like a fender? How did you make the fender?
Well, we had Kurtzite forms, which is a soft metal, and those are poured and reused.
So it's like a die?
Yeah. And they would be machined. They were easy to machine, and they still use Kurtzites. I think they're getting away from some of those technologies now with newer things, but they would start with a wood model. Our machine shop, our wood model shop was responsible to make all the parts in wood models. And the thing that I always thought was so great was the fact that they were the last thing between our product and the production line. I mean, if there was a curve of a fender line or how it fit to the body, Fisher body, and the door line was critical to the drawing, the last release drawing after maybe some changes. And they would make the model and keep those models up to date. And I had the responsibility of that at one time too.
So the wood model itself was basically the pattern?
Is basically the pattern. It would go to Detroit and be traced. Generally, this would, not all parts, but it would be duplicated with a tracer onto a hard die in Detroit.
Okay.
There were people that did that.
Did the wood model happen before or after the Kurtzite process?
The wood would come after the Kurtzite had been machined.
All right.
We would build it to the best of the machine shops. Knowledge. It would go over to,
Sure.
and then a wooden model would be made. That wooden model was always kept in storage for the life of the car and then some.
Did you ever have to hammer out a fender, I would call it by hand?
Oh yeah, some of the very first things in assembly, we had design check chassis. I think it's called that today. And we had to have the future of Oldsmobile as close as we could make it out of wood, paper, cardboard, however. And some of that
To simulate
the final design. And as you got closer to release of production, of course, you would update those check chassis to metal parts, try to get the real thing off the production tooling. But all this, of course, takes time. But we had the responsibility to find all the problems. And there's some, of course, that we didn't catch. And there were reasons for that due to a late change. You know, engineering changes engineering, I've been told in the past. And, well,
did you, it seems like you used to have some things called strap hammer, where those in existence over there?
Oh, yes. We had, back in our sheet metal department, we had people that hand form things. Oh, yes.
You could make a fender out of a flat piece of iron.
Right. Or steel.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, they pretty well could, but you could only make one in maybe 3 or 4 days. You
Yeah.
know, the time was
Yeah.
not a good factor.
Yeah.
And by the time they released whatever change it might be, yeah, we've many times had to, the way out was to hand make it. We've made handmade grills, for instance. We had people capable of making a grill. It used to take quite some time to do it. I mean, to make the forms, but an individual craftsman had to do that. And had very talented people in all phases in product engineering. I mean, it's all skilled trades. Very skillful. The apprentice system happened over there, and they became journeymen, and, but through experience and so forth.
Were those folks integrated at all into what I call the manufacturing folks that had similar?
Yes, many times the manufacturing superintendents would call over, and Vic Angsman, I can remember, used to call me yearly and ask if he could send over a couple people to look over our shoulders. And Kenny Ricks is another one. And they would. And of course, we were very cooperative with manufacturing because, after all, that was our bread and butter, all of us. Our existence depends on them putting cars out that people want and will buy.
And so those folks would actually arrive in your place to see what
was happening at the way before production. They wanted to train people. Vic Angsman, after that, those sessions, would take his people and train other people in manufacturing before the first prototype cars would come down the line. And so, yes, it was transferred, the technology, what we were going to run into and so forth. Their first C of the product was generally in product engineering. So we cooperated utmost. And then I'll tell you also, if you'll remind me, a program I had where we did it in reverse, where we sent engineers over to production, I think is a very critical thing, or interesting thing. I wish they would be, I don't know whether they're still doing that, but if they aren't, they should be.
And the purpose of that was?
To train our engineers in production atmospheres. Some of those graduate engineers had never been in a plane. And, but I'll go into that maybe a little later.
All right.
Because what sets that up is the fact that in 1981,
now, Dave, we jumped across a big period of time.
Oh, did we? Okay. I got to mention the Quad 4 as another mile point. The Quad 4 engine came along and was developed, of course, by a lot of people in product engineering. And, but eventually they had to make a prototype of this engine to see how it would fit with manufacturing methods and so forth. And our people, my people in product engineering, actually built the first Quad 4. And I distinctly remember the day that they put it on what is called the chain, which is where you hang an engine by a chain to see how much it bounces around, is out of balance or whatever, noisy and so forth. And it ran like a jeweler's watch. And I thought, my God, I've never seen an engine do that, especially, let alone the first one. But it did. And I always felt, I remember saying to my people that were there in the engine test room, if this engine will run 100,000 miles, we've got something. Well, the aftermath is that this engine, the Quad 4, does have a tremendous durability record. 200,000, several engines that I personally knew of before I left Oldsmobile, and several of them over 700,000 ran. And it used to be 100,000 was generally the breakthrough, the barrier, you might say. The barrier, if you could get one to run 100,000 back in the old days, that was a good engine. And like the straight six and other engines, of course.
Yeah, and the original V8.
V8 and the original V8. And so we certainly, that was a wonderful project to be a part of. Small part, but at least to be a part of. And to see what, how it's come out into Plant 5. And at Plant 5 is a plant built by the people. That's part of my QWL I'm going to tell you about next. Is there anything else, Jim, before
let's see. All the 70s basically, Dave, you then were the general superintendent of
Right.
the shop kind of
Right.
areas.
I remember the Oldsmobile with all the chrome.
The 58
The
thing?
58, I think, was the most chrome vehicle on the American market.
Chrome-plated monster, I think it was called.
And when I first saw it, I thought it looked like an American flag with all those chrome stripes. I kind of,
Interesting analogy.
yeah. And anyway, as history has pointed out, that's a very notable car. I think they bring that out in any history kind of a thing, because it was certainly unique, and everything on that car seemed like it was virtually chrome. Not too much paint showing. Wolfram, yes. Wolfram, our general manager at the time, had that concept, and it sold well too, and certainly was a building block to, and I look back and Oldsmobile was the car in third place for many years, and we were looking at Ford. We actually got ideas at one time that we would try to outdo Ford, surpass Ford. Chevy, of course, was number one, and Ford was a close second. But Oldsmobile hung in third place there for years, but at one time came pretty close. And I'm not so sure the Toronado, which I need to talk about maybe at this time too. Well, another project, John Belts was our chief engineer, and I'm sure he wanted to come up with something new and unique. So the idea of being America's first car with front-wheel drive concept was born. And in order to make some test cars so we could test the mechanical things, the front drive shafts, which we have today and so forth, and concepts, we took, Oldsmobile purchased two Toronado Rivieras, which was their sports car, but a rear drive. And we took those bodies and prepared two vehicles with the total front drive concept package. And I remember we got those in pretty well show shape. And those two went to the board of directors meeting at Phoenix, which they always have at our desert proving grounds, primarily to sell a front wheel drive. Now, to my knowledge, it was kept pretty secret in the corporation that we were going to come out with this. I don't recall any of the divisions being aware of it, or Ford or anybody. It kind of was a coup, and John Belts at the time wanted to keep that pretty well confidential. And by all means, we didn't tell Buick why we were buying those bodies. By all means, I wouldn't have been there very long. That knowledge got out. So I was on pins and needles pretty much during this whole thing. But the cars performed very well, enough so that the board of directors wrote those cars, and the vice presidents of General Motors bought the concept, gave money to the thing to come out in production. And from those two cars, those two vehicles, the Toronado, you might say, was born in a production sense. And since then, of course, you know that we've come out with what was considered the James Bond car of the time. It was always shown in some advertisements with James Bond. And it was a unique car, a car doctors had to have because it would go in the snow. And I'll tell you, I have pulled more cars out of snowbanks with a Toronado than I can ever recall. Because it was the greatest car in the snow that we had at that time. And it had pretty good weight on it, and it would pull a ton. I mean, it would virtually pull anything out of the snow. You didn't have to call for a wrecker. I know in my subdivision, I've pulled many a neighbor out. They knew I had a Toronado at the time. But that was a great project, and then to see the fulfillment of that into production, and as we know it today, too, still carrying on that tradition.
Did people generally, were everybody all excited about that sort of thing?
Oh, yes. The feeling, and of course, in product engineering, here's something that we had a big hand in, more so maybe than a lot of things. Because instead of on paper, we would actually take this from the initial concept. And I had to get all my people together to say that you don't go home and talk about this to your wife or at Thanksgiving with a family, or any other time, do you talk about this project, or a friend out there in Lansing or farmland? That was a very secret project. I do remember another little aspect. John Belts did ask for a name for the Tornado. They were searching for a name. I submitted a couple, 3 names, which didn't win. And the name Tornado, I believe, was conceived down in Detroit. And I think the word Tornado came directly from them. It wasn't a winner in Lansing or anybody, but the whole product engineering had a hand in submitting a name to 2 Belts to come up with a name for this new car. And I knew there were some funny ones, but I can't recall what they were. But anyway, mine weren't funny, but I submitted 3 of them, but didn't work out. So anyhow, the rest is history on that particular project.
Okay.
All right, and I come up to the time now, I believe, in, let's see, I remember John Belts became the general manager of Oldsmobile, really for a short length of time, all too short. And of course, we lost him, and he was, I believe, and I retired 4 years ago, but if you would ask most any of the old timers or any of the old people, one of the greatest chief engineers we ever had would be John Belts. And I'm not only saying that, but the others say that. Really had a rapport with the people. Many a night I would be in my office, in the assembly office, and it'd be 5 o'clock, and there would be our chief engineer with a flashlight looking. He was always noted for looking at a car underneath with a flashlight. He was known for that. And you'd see him at all times. We knew that he could come over at any time, and do that during the day. Something that was discussed in a meeting or whatever, don't know, and he knew that that engineering was responsible for a change, probably. But he would have rapport with the people. He'd ask our people that would be there on our night shift at that time, probably, hey, what do you think of this car? And he just had a tremendous rapport with the people. I remember one time, I had a fellow working for me by the name of Joe Crass. And Joe was quite a character. And he's the one that walked 25,000 miles in his career to and from his house every day for over 25 years. We calculated that it was around the world and then some. And I think it was in our team magazine that he walked the equivalent of around the earth. But anyway, Joe was out there, and Belts said to him, Joe, what do you think of our new car? And he said, gosh, John, he said, our people knew him by first name, by the way. He said, John, I went downtown last night, and he said, and he went on and on about some new car. I think it was a new Buick, whatever it was. I went out to their dealer. He said, I'm thinking of canceling my order for my Oldsmobile and buying a Buick. There was silence for several seconds. Still looking at the car with his flashlight. He said, Crass, the last time I saw your paycheck, I believe it said Oldsmobile on it. Never forgot. But he had that rapport with the people. And Joe thought it was absolutely the greatest thing he remembered it, still remembers it. Yeah. It was probably 20 years ago or more. But he remembers John saying that day. But another instant we built a car in product engineering for the governor. I can't, here's another name I cannot recall right this moment, but he was the governor of Michigan, and he was a paraplegic.
Paraplegic, yeah.
And we, of course, did projects on those kind of controls for the public. They weren't Valiant controls, yeah. Yes. There we are. Jim, I'm glad I got you here to help me here. But anyway, the first Valiant controls, and we used to design those on our check chassis and be ready for production for people such as the governor. Sure. But we built this complete car. And the car went to him. Well, several months came by, and a fellow appeared at my door in Cottage Engineering, and he said, "Mr. Belts has sent this over." I said, "Well, what? What's going on here?" He said, "Well, the governor has sent a pen and pencil set, very nice pen and pencil set, as a thank you for that car, and Mr. Belts wants you to have it because you people created the car." And I thought that was just wonderful. You know, that was a fond memory I had. But what the aftermath of the story is, I turned the pencils over, and they had been engraved with John Belts' name on it.
Oh, no.
And I did not dare give that. I soul searched for time, and I knew what he'd do. He'd go out and have another set for me, and I didn't want him to do that. So I just never told him about that. But that actually happened. Another thing to tell you what kind of a person Belts was. Another rapport. I mean, a guy like that would come in and say, "How are things going?" And did after you know, he became general manager. And there were others that I can recall did that, of course. And like Bob Stemple, our current president,
Okay.
Bob Schultz, vice president of General Motors.
Those were kind of
People that were instrumental in our life during those times. And on Bob Stemple, I can remember a Sunday that we were working on he was a chassis engineer, and I called him at home, which I hated to call anybody at home. But we were to a certain part on a project, and we needed an answer. And he gave me that answer. I said, "Bob, thank you so much for letting me know." He said, "No, Dave, I'm coming in." I said, "Bob, you're having dinner. Don't come in." He said, "No, I'm gone." And he turned on the phone, and he came in. And it was just that kind of thing. And Belts would do that kind of thing, I'm sure, and did on different occasions. I mean, he was a busy man, and to come when Building 66 was across the street, he would come across and see something that we felt he should see. It was very important to a design or whatever. And so I'd have to say that what caused him to be thought of in that manner was his rapport with people. And many a time the story was that he would interview a person from the press, and when he was done, he would say, "Now I want to interview you." Oh yes, he was known for that in the corporation, that he would want to interview the person. You know, shoe on the other foot. And but definitely John was quite a person. I'm trying to think. He was in on the he was the one where the Toronado project came from to do. And there were many others along the way, and I just can't recall them all. But that era was one where innovation was very important to Oldsmobile. We felt we stayed ahead of the rest of the pack, General Motors pack, I say.
Was there any look at what I call foreign competition at that time frame, Dave, or not?
Not too much. There was the concept came along to build a smaller car, because the small car was starting to come in and get popular. And if I look back with any maybe things we should have done better, was maybe we should have looked at that little car in greater length.
Yeah.
But the effect of what people thought, at least upper management thought, was that it costs as much to produce a small car as a big car.
Mm-hmm.
And we are driven, whether we like it or not, we are driven by profit. And the public has to be told that General Motors does a lot, and they do a lot for safety and development. Like the things along the highway, the barriers that prevent a car from jumping over and bounce you back onto the road, was developed at the Milford Proving Ground. Breakable lights across highways, generally in the inner cities and so forth. There is a breakaway design where if a car hits it, it bends over, breaks off, you might say. And that's bringing me to another thing that we worked on too, was a Saginaw steering gear really development, but we had a lot to do with it, with sending them prototype information. So far was the breakaway steering column.
Oh, okay.
Which was definitely beneficial, because we had accidents that occurred in the corporation where they were pierced by the steering wheel. And in a crash, you go with a tremendous force enough to throw you out the front window. That's why seat belts. and the initial airbags. And apparently, I don't think we all understood that the airbags were going to be so popular with people, because there was some negatives. I worry about how they're going to be after 10 years and how you service them in a podunk dealership. I worry about that. I hope we can solve it, because the market is demanding that this come along now. But there's one that Oldsmobile was primarily in. A lot of innovations like that. And that breakaway steering column, yes. That was one for safety. And I think, my mind is bobbling around here, but I think that the public need to know that quad 4 engine, the durability of it. I think it's an unsung capability of that engine. Really a high point. I think it will affect a lot of people that are now asking what engine's in the car.
Yeah, it's a good point.
You know, ever since we had the Chevy flap, and I hate to say, but we were a part of that. I remember doing the project.
How'd that come to pass, Dave?
Well, as I understood it, we didn't have the capacity to build enough engines for the other car divisions, maybe even our own production estimates. And they had to come up with an alternative engine. And obviously Chevy said, oh, hey, use our engine. We'll have that capacity, whatever you got to have or whatever. Anyway, the engine, I remember sinking it into a check chassis. And the rest is history, you know. Wrong communications between a mechanic in a garage and a customer. There's another case, but it could have happened with anybody from Oldsmobile too. Go down the street and get the item. I can't remember what it was. But his customer was told to go down. She was a friend of the Attorney General of Illinois, and the rest is history. Because she was told to go down to a Chevy dealership for a part that they didn't have, evidently. But at least they could have gone to get the product for the customer. See, that's going the extra mile, which is what we used to do at Oldsmobile. Go the extra mile for the customer. And it's just doing things like that. And I think, how many times have we gone into a store where a salesman will do that? Occasionally you'll find one. Just knock themselves out to find you because they don't have what you want, but will help you out with information or whatever. And I hope we can get back to those days. Okay, now, I come through the 80s or the 70s and the 80s, and Oldsmobile was number 3 in the corporation. And I don't know the years that all existed, but I remember when we built the 10,000th, 25,000 car. Then it was a bigger figure, but we had hats in those days with 20. I think I have one home.
With the 25 million.
25 million. Was it 25 million? Oh, I am out of date. 25 million. Excuse me, 25 millionth car. And we had a lot of things like that. And then getting in 80, I'm going to stop at 81. I was asked at that time to help develop the concept of quality of work life in our Oldsmobile engineering. It had already got a start in the corporation. Very pioneering effort, I might say, and I was a part of a pioneering effort at Oldsmobile. I got a ton of war stories of how of the things that we faced and happened, but I had some very wonderful experiences of meeting corporation people such as Vice President Earl Warren and N. Sizor, who just recently passed away in the corporation, were great people in this effort. But anyway, back in Lansing, John Powers and six of us total, used to meet. How are we going to get this thing really into Oldsmobile, this concept? And the basic concept is that listen to your people.
Okay. Well, what was precipitating that? Any background in back of that, Dave?
Well, somebody determined And the fellow that went to Japan, I hate to say this, American
Deming?
Industry,
Deming?
Deming, Professor Deming was the fellow that started a lot of this in Japan. Nobody listened to him here in this country. And you will get ideas, but you see, we've been trained. If you look back on it, we were trained really not to listen to our people, because the main feeling was, I'm a manager or I'm at this high level position and I'm paid to come up with the ideas to keep all you people working out in the plant. And that's the basic concept, but they were educated that way out of college or whatever. They come into General Motors and that's what they learned. That was just the way things were. And Deming's philosophy was get the people involved, listen to them. You don't give up your managerial position. You listen to your people and then you make the final division. But you got one more thing to do. If you don't take their viewpoint, you have to take the idea, go back and say, thank you for that idea, but I've decided to go this way, and give them the reasons why you still feel like you do as the manager. There's no loss in that, but it does take a little extra work, which is what we want the workers to do, go that extra mile. And so forth. So we've got to get back to that, I think.
So that was, the start was in product for this particular kind of
Yes.
thing, although the plant was trying to do it too.
The plant was trying to do it at the same time. We had fellow members that were in the same position I was as manager of quality of work life. Out in the plant, there were other people. When I left in '84, we had as many as 50 to 60 people in this business at Oldsmobile. I don't know what the figure is now, but it grew. And in the corporation, they ended up with the vice president, making a vice president, and that was Earl Warren. And working with people and training people at Black Lake, which the union, and it was getting the union instead of we and they, which you hear about once in a while now on a television short. We and they, we got to get back to we, not you guys or them, we. And we've got to be one. And that's when I told you that we had teamwork and everybody was a family. That's teamwork, hopefully.
Good.
And it's important because I'll never forget Earl Warren telling about an incident he had when he was asked to go down to one of the plants in Ohio, I think, which was having a lot of team problems or people problems. That's the plant in Ohio, Lordstown. And he was down there to see what he could do to see or whatever, to find out what the problems were, because they were having things as bad as sabotage down there.
Yeah, not very good.
That is not very good. In any case. So he was down there, but he tells this story. He went down there and looked around for 3 days. And and like I say, this was his personal experience. Hourly man came up to him and he said, I'll tell you what'll fix that. There was a certain problem they had down there mechanically or with their production process. He said, this is what you need to do. And he would tell you as an audience, and it worked. And he said, this is why we've got to listen to our people, because they all come from different backgrounds, whatever it is, they've had different experiences, and they may see something, another pair of eyes, may have an idea. Then you as the managers decide whether you want that or not. But the concept is your people are your most important product. And they really are, because eventually that's what counts. That's what we're always taught in QWL.
How did the management side of the house look
Get away
upon
from
this? I don't know, look upon this approach, so to speak.
Well, you must remember that this was entirely new. What? Have your people tell you things? They felt that was whatever against their management position. You know, it was a threat to them, and they weren't paid to have those thoughts.
Resistance?
Was it resistance? No, it wasn't a resistance. I don't ever recall, because it was working together and getting them to talk first and then see what you can do. And there's been many, many programs. The Plant 5 plant was completely built with the hourly people having a part of that building. Other great story I have of Plant 5, a quality of work life. Great story. They asked the people what they thought about certain things, what they wanted to see in the plant. One of the suggestions was have a common restroom for men and women. Now that is to say, wash your hands and then they go their separate ways.
Sure.
And put it up on a elevated off the floor. Don't use the floor space for that. You know what that thing saved Oldsmobile? Because they had plans to put 4 or 5 bathrooms in the plant. The plumbing all went in one place. Everybody in that huge building out there all knew where it was. And it was up, you walked up a few stairs, saved thousands of dollars, as I understand it, for that idea. But that's what's important. They can save money. And then our suggestion plan, we all know that there's been many, many suggestions resulted out of that. Well, quality work life was getting everybody involved, not just a few. Because we need to get the American worker into, and engineering too, into making suggestions.
Did that early on, when you first got there, did that process exist
No,
then and get
no,
lost?
No, it got lost. We had the same problems in product engineering.
Okay.
You know, I mentioned a few of the now presidents of General Motors that did listen to people.
Yeah.
And I gave you 2 of those names.
Yeah.
They were listeners. They were people.
Mhm.
And I can't emphasize enough about Bob Semple. He is a people person. He always was, always will be.
What happened then in that, how long were you in the QWL process, Dave?
I was in it 2 years.
Okay.
In that time, I taught at Black Lake. Vice presidents of the corporation were there, general managers. I mean, that level of people, as well as union presidents, vice presidents.
So you were trying to get the word out, so to speak.
Yes. And we had training that got people together. We had some horrible instances where a plant, I don't want to mention the name, came up to Black Lake and they got in a fight in the lobby registering.
Was it a real fight?
No, well, they started pushing and shoving.
David F. Page of 1635 Boynton Drive, Lansing, Michigan, 48917. The interview was conducted on February 4th, 1992 by Jim Walkinshaw at the Oldsmobile History Center at 4000 North Grand River in Lansing. This is tape number 2 of 2 tapes. Hey Dave, back on.
Back on the QWL area.
Yeah, you were having this kind of.
Oh, one of the horrible examples at Black Lake occurred that I didn't see it, but apparently a group of management people and the heads of their unions, of course, thought, well, we'll start out the right way and we'll go in the same car up to Black Lake. We'll motor together, get to know one another a little better in the car.
Good idea.
They got up there right where it was to sign in, and they got into an argument which led to some abrupt pushing and shoving, and finally somebody interceded and told them to go back home, and they did.
Send them home. Huh?
Sent them home. So there's some horrible examples, and there's many. There's some horrible examples at Oldsmobile that I really don't want to get into, because my pleasant memories of my 34 and a half are very pleasant.
Was the QWL thing, how did you view that?
I viewed it that Oldsmobile, and I'm probably prejudiced here, had one of the best QWL organizations going on in the corporation. I think we were told that one time by Earl Warren. I know he came up to talk at one of our programs. And here, again, we're just introducing, this is a complete concept for people to understand. And just like a lot of us are trying to understand rap music, where's it coming from? I mean, whether we ever will or not, I don't know. But I mean, it's the same kind of thing. There's so many new concepts and things that it's hard for us to accept that other people are coming up with these things, and this will happen again.
We at Olds then sort of plowing a lot of new ground, so to speak? Or
Yes.
in the way?
And Oldsmobile was an innovative division. It was the farthest one out from Detroit. We felt we got left out of things, you know, along the way, that we were out there and we were country cousins, but we were the farthest one out of the corridor, which was Pontiac to Detroit and Buick, of course.
Good in some cases.
In some cases, that was very good. In other cases, we felt a little differently. But basically, Oldsmobile was out there to come up with innovative ideas to keep their sales going. That's what I think brought the Toronado and the Quad 4 in, as well as other things, to keep ahead. And we took great pride in being different. I think that all old timers will tell you that we were proud of that we were the innovative division.
See, when did you retire, Dave?
In 1984.
We were just starting the reorganization process?
The reorganization process had been started probably 2 years. And really what it did, that process, you got to remember, when a reorganization hits a workplace, it's going to happen. People, that's all they talk about. And it completely obliterated the quality of work life in General Motors, I think. Yeah, okay. And at Oldsmobile. Okay. Other things took your time. How would we redivide our manpower and so forth, those kind of things, and prepare for a reduction in the future.
How was that viewed in that era, that thing?
Well, everybody, you know, not knowing is the worst thing, you know, it isn't any of us when we don't know or feel we know, even feel we know that we know what's going on. All kinds of rumors hit the treadmill. And pretty soon you're discussing things that really aren't true. You're afraid and everything, and it caused a lot of dissension. So quality of work life as such, and there were some negative things. There's some people that could probably give some negative things about that, but I thought it was a great thing. I mean, the other divisions did some fabulous things. I know that I myself personally got an opportunity to go to Tonawanda to train their people. I and several others that people from Tonawanda had seen in action up at Black Lake. And I was fortunately enough, and my partner went with me.
This is because Oldsmobile had done good, so
to speak, and we were considered on the leading edge of quality of work life, I think. And from what I could understand, and I truly believe that. And when we had the likes of Earl Warren, our vice president for human relations, come to Lansing, along with Herb Bluestone, who was a famous union person in quality of work life and is a teacher right now. He's a professor, to come to Lansing, along with a current president, Owen Beaver. I mean, these are the experiences that I had. One funny thing I got to tell about Owen Beaver, he wouldn't probably appreciate that, but he had an Oldsmobile coming to Lansing for our meeting in product engineering auditorium with Owen Beaver with Irvin Bluestone. He was to meet at the motel or the hotel out there on West Saginaw. Anyway, we got a call. Oldsmobile got a call. I think he called Sam Donahue first, but anyway, the call came. He is stuck in Ionia. He had a regular, and I'm sure the American public has done this, a regular gasoline car, Oldsmobile, by the way, but he had put diesel in it. And it just won't run once you get up over 25%. That's what we were always told, 25. And I know, because I got a car once that had diesel engine in it. I do not know the percentage, but it was like a bucking horse. And tried to go to Detroit with it. So I know what he was up against. Well, anyway, we dispatched somebody out of product engineering and took care of him, towed the car back in, and we changed the fuel for him while he was speaking in this morning program. And but we were honored to have those two gentlemen. But that's the kind of things that we got involved with. But he felt so sorry that he was red-faced, and he just, you know, but he was on his way by afternoon.
Sure. Yeah, that's good.
Back in business.
Good PR.
Good PR. You bet. And we had a wonderful relationship with the union.
Yeah, can you characterize that during your years as your general superintendent and superintendent sort of job? How was the union relations in those days, Dave?
Well, they knew that we were very cooperative with the production as well as inspection or reliability folks in getting information whenever they call. I myself personally know that I did wanted to do, was in the spirit to do anything that would help them, if I could do it.
Yeah.
And because I knew that we'd lead in the long line to a better car. It had to, if we could, and so we cooperated with the union, and we had a lot of union management. I had a fellow assigned with me that was also, and we would teach our people before I got the opportunity to go off the manufacturing campus, so to speak. We had to do it with our own people. We had to train product engineering people. We trained nearly everyone. Now, there were some people that didn't want to come up to those. They got a chance to go off the job. There's always those people that resist anything. And they didn't want to hear, they didn't want to contribute. But I think a majority of those felt that they had missed something that they wished they hadn't have, because we had wonderful things happen in these sessions. And then, of course, I got the opportunity to help the Tonawanda people.
Yeah.
And actually, a couple of shifts of their people, I went 2 different occasions. And to be asked back when there were only 4 of us, to be one of the 4 asked to go back and teach there. Don Rust is the plant manager. And he is one of the most quality of work-life individuals I've ever met as a plant manager. He was for it. He could taste it. He wanted it. He knew that was the future. And I think what's proof of the fact is that General Motors still keeps him there in that plant, because that plant is probably one of the fastest. They produce 6,500 engines a day. So you can imagine what goes in and out of there, and that doesn't just happen. And I've been to their plants, and I went down, and after probably 3 years since I've seen these people from Black Lake, those people on the line would stop and shake my hand. I mean, they remembered that effort at Black Lake. But now here I was walking through their plant, and of course I had changed in a couple of years, and so forth. The second time I went down, I was in my job at Demmer Corporation.
Okay.
But I had 2 opportunities to go down there, and that was a wonderful experience. Just wonderful.
Did the union relationship change over that continuum of time that you were there?
I did not think so. I thought it was still in building every year. And we were, every day we were doing things to get more and more to. And I know that there's programs out there at Plant 5 that are a lot of QWL. They weren't necessarily from our QWL effort, but they were, people are starting to think, hey, such as punching the clock, not punching the clock. I mean, that's a terrible concept. I don't even know that I supported it at the time when I was in QWL.
Yeah.
And because I got too many horror stories that would have to change in order for that to be acceptable. But and I guess it's still going on out there, as far as I know. I don't know what they'd say about it, for after 5 years, but and I know you got electrical time cards now.
Yeah, right. Cool.
And but that was a concept that's out there. I would like to think, and I do not know this for sure, that a lot of our work has survived, and I'm talking about basic talking together. And the thing we used to stress is we got to do away with we and they. That's got to stop. We'll never make it into the year 2000 if we don't. We've got to be us. And when the managers think of a program, they got to think, can we do it? Can us do it? You've got to involve your people. Any smart manager will involve his people. I don't care what job you are. At what level? From foreman on up to managers and beyond. You have to involve your people. And you hear Stemple mention that in some of the stuff. And now, of course, our workers are being criticized in the news right now. And I think we got to get back there. I'm not so, I don't really, and I'm not an authority of where we are on some of those accusations. I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I just shudder from hearing them and that somebody else has heard about them.
Yeah.
And, but we have to admit as Americans that Dr. Deming took this concept,
Yes.
which maybe came from Sweden. I think I was told that once. But anyway, and I don't know how true that is, but we took that concept and took it to Japan. And we all remember when the worst thing you could say about anything was that it was made in Japan. You'd go out of your way to buy something other than anything made in Japan.
Joe.
And it was basically a lot of junk. Yes, it absolutely was. And certainly it was perceived as that. Well, the Deming concepts took a hold, and there are a lot of them just besides more than we and they. But I'm getting to the basic, what is it? Is getting people to talk to one another. I mean, I can't tell you the number of things, and I think you'll have to admit this, Jim and you're, that whenever they wanted to do something that they knew that the troops were not going to like very much, whatever it might be, who did they send out there to tell them? Who do you think told them these negative things that they would hear? Yeah, it went down to a level of supervision. That level of supervision went down and finally got down to a guy pretty close to the bottom.
First line foreman.
First line foreman or whatever, and he's the one that had to go out there and be General Motors, if you will, or Oldsmobile. And a lot of them weren't done with, you know, they had no training how to present negative ideas to your employees. And it's how you tell them, you know, you gotta know, and you gotta have the training to know how to present this. And let's face it, dictatorial management has been popular for 75 years in General Motors. And not just at General Motors, but all over the country. Dictatorial. I am paid all this money to boss and to be the authority, to be the idea person. And middle managers, I get promotions through having some of these ideas. I'm not going to give that credit to an hourly man down there. But Earl Warren did. And so did John Belts. And there are others.
Those were the differences.
Those were the differences. And I'm on my soapbox a little bit, and I don't mean to be, but there are some things I think need to be captured. And
How about jump off the QWL thing for a minute? Share with us a little bit about the some of the individuals you've worked with over the years, Dave, if you would.
okay, names now?
Oh, you mentioned G. Rocket Jones.
Yes, I started. One of my first thoughts were G. Rocket Jones. He was our general manager, but sales manager. Excuse me, glad you corrected me. Sales manager. Oldsmobile used to put on shows at the Michigan Theater, the old Michigan Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And they would introduce the new cars with all the hoopla on the stage, but he was a showman deluxe. And he, the best way, I think, enough that back since 1954, or 3 or 4, that I joined Oldsmobile, I can remember him vividly. But he was a showman and put on a show that you'd never forget, and he was all part of it. He didn't just go up there and say, now we sold this many cars per year and all that, and dry stuff if you wanted, that the wives weren't interested in hearing, but he was a showman, and he was in that job and he did it well. I'm sure that dealers and everybody listened to him because he was a showman, and I think in a lot of instances you have to be. I think teachers have to be, and we're all teachers, hopefully. We need to be teachers to some degree. Have to be teachers, or have to be people oriented, and we have to listen to people, and so forth. But he was certainly one of my first memories. Then along came Jack Wolfram
Yeah, contrast him to maybe Phelps and others.
and John Belts came and Bob Cook. There were three that I knew very
Did
well.
those guys manage any different between the three of them?
Well, I didn't know Jack Wolfram at the capacity I was in product, even though I was far down in product engineering, and so I didn't see him in the engineering meetings. It wasn't until Belts came along and a lot of Wolfram. But they had, of course, contrasting styles, but I would have to say what differentiate them. Certainly Bob Cook was a very pleasant person to work with. He was a no-nonsense in a meeting, and he would separate the wheat and the chaff. And I don't want to get on about people in particular, but he certainly was a very good general manager, in my opinion, as well as a lot of these others. And of course, Wolfram did a lot. And he put on those shows in Detroit that I can remember where we all got on a train and went down and saw a regular Hollywood type show. And he was interested in that, and it brought the dealers together. Vivid memories. Okay. Some of the people over in production, of course, and I'm going to skip around here, are Ed Sobrowski, Mike Minnow. Minnow was definitely a very positive, he was a positive, well, of course, he had positive and negative. We all did. But overall, he was a dynamic superintendent, no question about it. He is one you would not forget. Both, and and he let you know where he stood, how he thought. There was no him hauling around with Mike Minnow. And I think anybody that worked for him knew that. And
would he have been characterized as the old style bull of the woods type guy?
I would say so.
No.
Well, I would characterize, I wouldn't want to tell a member of his family that maybe, but.
But he would have been a member of the old school.
The old school, yes. New school, definitely John Belts. Definitely, I would say the new school, he used to ask people, what do you think? Went out of his way. Bob Cook was that way too. Bob Cook was that way.
When did that switch kind of happen from what I call the old schooler type to the new schooler types? Was it in that time frame?
In that time frame. And I think the man that only lasted a few days, who had his training in South America.
Oh, no, Sanchez?
Sanchez came in, and he was definitely a people person.
He Saturday died.
Yeah, and died within a few days. We had a guy come in when he made that quick move, and of course he was to pass away. We had a man in that died too.
That was Baker.
Baker.
He came in right after Bell.
Bells, yeah, okay. And I do not, Howard Carroll, and I do not know a lot about him. I never had the opportunity to meet him, but Bob Cook was one that would come up and say, hey, I'm Bob Cook. A simple handshake. The whole secret that I learned from Win Schuler, how he could remember so many names. He said, I didn't know all those names, but when you see somebody you don't know, extend your hand. Guess what that person has to do? He has to give his, because he might not know yours. And guess what that does to an hourly person? And we had others that, of course, did that, but I saw this firsthand with a lot of people. And one time I was in Chevrolet engineering, and I'm going back to a thought about Bob Stemple. He was chief engineer of Chevrolet division at the time, and walking down the hall, going to a meeting with 2 or 3 Oldsmobile people to a inner plant meeting. He's walking towards me. I haven't seen Bob since he left Oldsmobile, probably a good 5 years. And Bob came diagonally across the hallway and he said, Pagey, how the hell are you? Now he had to recall my name from Pi, and I really didn't expect him to remember my name. But first name or last name or whatever, and invited me to his office, but I told him I had a meeting to go to, and as it turned out, I was too long in the meeting and he had gone. But that's the kind of, believe it or not, there are a few people that will do that. especially when they're with their own level of people from their own organization. He took probably 5 minutes of his time to do that, but look how it meant me. I'd remember that forever. And so he would do that. Other names, the Dyksters, I remember the two Dyksters. One went to Ford. One was in, well, I think they both were. I'm not sure. It could be that he was, but I do remember that Bugus, whoever the guy was that was in the Breach from Ford, and Henry, of course, got a hold of one of the Dyksters, and he went down there as an executive. We had Jim Dykstra remain, of course, in product engineering. He became our executive engineer for Oldsmobile. George Jones, who's gone, was certainly in on a lot of design from the drawing standpoint. He came up through the drawing board era. Now guess what you got? Computers.
Changing it.
Another change. And you produce microfilm from however they do it, and I don't know that exactly, but I do know that things are done, and I've seen them on drawings of that nature. Other names, Tom Downey. I was here when
How about Tom?
he was works manager, came from Janesville, I believe.
Right, with Rollis.
He was a man. Guess what I remember about him? He would come in. He would come into Oldsmobile or production line. He was with Oldsmobile, and he would show up and would call people by their first name. He probably found out what it was, but I mean, he talked to the hourly. Really, when I stop to think about it, he may be one of the first people in those kinds of positions. And of course, Bob Rollis. Gosh, who could forget Bob Rollis? He was a people person, certainly. Had a winning personality. Tom Downey was a very authoritative. He was probably a man of two personalities. He was the straw boss on one side and then a very human person, or would extend his hand, so to speak, and out in the plant. Lowell Koenig was our assistant chief engineer and then got tapped to be chief engineer of Buick. Certainly he was in on a lot of developments. Bob Truxell, who has since left General Motors in the later years here, but Bob Truxell was certainly a very instrumental person. Tom Tompkins. Now this is in my memory bank. Understand that there are hundreds of people I'm going to miss. But if you had a list, I could say, oh, I remember him. Emo Roost. Emo was over in production on the paint line when I first met him. And he was in the the Oldsmobile magazine, and informed everybody that he was the oldest General Motors employee. He had 50 plus years in, still going. And he eventually retired, and of course he's gone. But I don't know what ages he was, but he had 50 years of service.
Did he relay anything to you over those years?
No, I'm just so sorry for that he didn't. No, he didn't. I don't recall that I had or anything I can remember, and that's probably another name, Bob Barlow. He was the industrial engineer of Oldsmobile, and he was responsible for all the plant layout and future plant layout and keeping the things running that were running, supposedly running. And now I knew his son, Mel, who was a vice president out in a vice president of either General Electric or some other electrical out in California, San Diego to be exact. And so I knew him. Bob Barlow. Had many a talk with him. And I remember his advice, and I never took it. But I remember him as terrible. What you remember? I remember him telling me, change jobs often.
He did.
Yeah. Probably he had done that. I don't know that, but I assume what he said, don't stay in a job very long. And the thing is, some people, I feel, make a career of that. And our system promotes it. Sometimes it does. Did you know I'm flashing back. You asked me a question about the Bull of the Woods. The Bull of the Woods manager, dictatorial, we call it, dictatorial manager. It is known proof. There's a professor from University of Michigan, and I hate to say that word, but from University of Michigan that has the documental proof and can show you that for about 2 years, people work in fear of him when he comes to the organization. And they actually produce, and his look at the business goes up. He looks good in people that are selecting him for future jobs. I'm talking about the presidents of General Motors, vice president, whoever does that. He looks good to the corporation the first 2 years, but then he goes down below where the people manager is a little slower to get a hold because they aren't used to this. You got to sell everybody. People have been told what to do for so long.
The end result is the people guy.
The people guy eventually goes by him. Oh yes, there's documental proof of why are we doing this in General Motors. And they've been able to prove that to the top people. No doubt. Oh yeah, but the reason, what I'm trying to say is that our system promoted the Bull of the Woods person for all those years.
Because he looked good on paper.
He looked good on paper. And had efficiency, had whatever else. You know, and of course, you know, other things, of course, made him look good. But I mean, everything counts as a team, and you're selling cars, you're building good cars, people perceive it as a good car. And he looks good by all the yardsticks. But, and so he looks good, and that's why we used to call those kind of managers hatchet people. The corporation couldn't keep him very long. And I get back to sabotage. I'm not trying to a derogatory, but those kinds of things get to that in organizations that have had it. They strike out in any way. And you got to remember that people can hurt you in 1,000 different ways and you'll never know it, as a manager especially. They'll kill you. I mean, there's theft goes up. They'll do anything. Just all kinds of things. Instead of saying, hey, is this good for the company or not? And so that's why it has been so pronounced. But anyway, where did I leave off here? I was through. I did go to Tonawanda, which I've told you about. I did retire in 1987. And of course, this is part of the reorganization thing.
So you were
At that time, I do want to bring up something. The last 2 years, I did not work in the quality of work life. We felt it was staged. We put the building blocks there, and it was going to be carried on by good people. The only thing, the reorganization probably killed QWL or whatever feeling there is now for it. I had an opportunity to go from that, and this was for Jim Benner. I worked for Jim Benner. And one of the projects I went on was to work, and Dorshimer too wanted to have, I sold them on the idea of putting the people on the production line, all our incoming engineers, and to put them through the different parts of product engineering.
by the production line, you mean actually out in the.
Out in the production, yes. Due to my original friendship with union people, it was easy to have that done as far as the union. I merely told them, look, you've always wanted to tell the engineers how to do this and do that and build it better, so
It was a chance for the union guys to tell them.
right, I sold the union on the fact, not only of friendship, but I said, hey, this is your opportunity to have input from your people. Lordy, you can go by them on the line there too if you want to, you know, you other union people, whatever you feel or want or you're curious about. And so they got behind it wholeheartedly. And I said for a week, or the most I'm allowed to take them off their engineering job, get approval from their, whoever was their boss. A week is all I could get. Japan spends 6 months at this on all new people. But now let me tell you, that program went on and I probably put 50 engineers through that. I had veteran engineers that had been there before I came on the scene come and ask me if they could take part in that. And I said, get an okay from your boss first. If he says yes, I said, you're going to have to sell him, not having your services for a week, but it's like a vacation. But you're going to have to sell him, but I think you will gain something by it. I had engineer after engineer tell me how that program, what it meant to them to go over there. They were sent over there as a hourly person in every respect. They carried their lunch pails. We told them to. We asked them not to divulge that they were from product engineer or were engineer, because there's always amount of friction, I will say, between engineers and manufacturing people. See, I've spanned both of them. I can see why that's got to be broken down. This was a way I felt it could be done in the future, and we could build on that. Well, anyway, people, veteran engineers with 10 or 15 years asked me to go over there, and I did get a few of them over there before I retired. And of course, along with the reorganization came job elimination and reductions of force, and I was a part of that. And anyway, that's what took place. But that program, and I not only sent them over to production engineering for 1 week, I sent them to Milford Proving Grounds. I sent them to all the shop areas, sheet metal, assembly, garage. Why? Because the minute they're turned over as an engineer, they go in the lab and work. Stuff that they knew in college, oscilloscopes and all that kind of thing. But they're thrown right in. What's one of the first things? They got to read a blueprint. And we are woefully lacking in blueprint reading, believe me. I know certain engineers at Olds that are out there. These kids are coming in. You talk about reading and writing, I mean, let alone if they can't do that, how can they dimension a print? They don't, they need basic drafting. I was going to set up a program, and I had the ear of Dorshimer at that time, when he was chief engineer, of a possible night program setting up to teach them how GM wants them to do it. Now with the interdivisional thing, my God, you need it all more. And computerization. And of course, maybe some of that demand is lessened. But I'll tell you this, when we made our die models in the model shop, guess what the computers brought in? The lack of dimensioning. See, we used to scale some of those blueprints. And except for you were told never to do that, but everybody did. I mean, hey, if you haven't got a dimension, you take it off the print. Well, a print has shrinkage and so forth, but we all took that into consideration. But what happens is the engineers dimension less than they used to with paper drawings or draftsmen.
Because the computer's right.
The computer's always right, and they have to put that input in there, but they don't. So right now, or when I left, they were having problems in non-dimensioning, and here you have to develop a curve of a fender or a hood, and it's got to be right, because that's the way it'll be when it gets to production. One chance, and that's your chance. And if they don't have the right dimensioning, well, to make the wood model, you got to have the dimension. A curvature, especially. No dimensioning of the coordinates and the development of a line. Less of it than there used to be. Maybe it's a part of the computerization.
I'm sure that's helped.
Yeah, that's probably helped. And it's just the way it works. The dimensioning and putting arrowheads in, and even knowing the dimensioner, but somewhere along the line to create the print at all, to build the wood model. Somebody had to do something. The problem is, I suspect someone said, that's it, brother, it looks good on paper, and that's it. Then you have to take the dimensioning off that line, whatever he developed. Then you have to see if it clears the engine and all that, if it's a hood or the door. And so all those kinds of things are very important. But computerization, we've got to get faster to the production line from an idea. There's no question about it. And I foresee that they will eliminate wooden models. It's coming in the computerization.
Draw it, turn it into a die.
Yeah. From this guy, basic guy saying, well, that looks good. And it's accepted by the signature of the checker and the boss of that department. From there, it'll go into the computer, and the computer will cut a die model. The technology is here right now, really. And I foresee the time when wooden models, and that's, we have to make one for production. We had to, as well as keeping one in the vault. Two of them, because manufacturing had to keep it in some kind of a cage.
Yeah.
Because if they had if they wanted to go to those models with their part, and if it fit the wooden model, they knew they had something to go to engineering about. Hey, there's something wrong in the design because our part fits that model. And I'm sure they're still doing that, especially for a bracket or whatever it might be, if they could. And but that's going to change. There's going to be no wood. I foresee the wood that those are made out of is a special wood,
Mahogany or something?
Cativa from South America. The problem is that everybody uses it. You can imagine Fisher Body probably uses tons of it. We use tons of it. So does everybody else. Right now, but there are some plastics coming in that might take their place. But the problem with either plastics or this Cativa wood is that it's put together with glue that is hazardous to their health. They found out. Yeah. Everybody has to have a yearly physical over in product engineering. It's a scare, more or less, but I guess they've got data that shows.
Asbestos thing.
Yeah, like asbestos and so forth. So that's why they're going to want to get rid of wood models, I think. Yeah, well, the thing is with these plastics, guess what? Those particles are held together with glues that aren't the best in the world for you either. Resonance. And so, I don't know, if they can develop something that will get around that, they'll have something and be machinable and so forth. But there's a need there to have a model of the design in storage. It's the Bible that you go to.
People feel comfortable with a piece of hard something to put your fingers on. They don't feel comfortable with
Now, you can go to layout machines and all that technology of Zeiss machines and so forth. That's all wonderful, but there's nothing like finding out that hole is off. On a night that maybe they're having trouble putting the hood on because it doesn't fit. Maybe you got the hoods and the bracket off. And if they can see that on a model, they can go back and do something about it. Instantly they can find out their answer. So, and let's see, what else here? So I had that program with new engineers. Wonderful program. I don't think it's being continued, but I can't understand why, because they were calling me up, Dorshimer mainly, and several of the other people, to how the program was going. And I think they wanted me to come up with a plan to send all their engineers through the production line. Mm-hmm. And of course, the rest is history. Dorshimer got moved into down to Detroit, and the reorganization was beckoning him, and so that thought, because he was starting to hear from these engineers to tell what a great problem. I had a lady engineer, 10 years experience, go over on the production line. Now, she designs bumpers. She was in the bumper design area. Guess what? She came back from 1 week over there and came back and made 6 design changes so that they could put them together, because she had to put the bumpers in with some help, of course. And yeah, there was a need there. Wonderful experience. She wrote that up in our QWL News of Product Engineering one time. She had a beautiful letter. And she said, I asked her, I said, how was the experience in your training? I mean, and everything that you had. And she said, this was the crowning touch. You got to remember, there's engineers that have never been in a production situation, never. And they come out of college and they don't know what's going on.
Goes back to that old approach with the General Motors Institutes too.
Yeah.
Where they would spend.
Yes, it's the concept of the GMI, putting them in it's a wonderful plan, because you can't beat that kind of experience, really. Right. And friendships were developed. I had people invited to parties. engineers that went to a party and so forth would go back over the line, say, hello, how are things going this year with,
Yeah,
say, the bumpers or whatever, but they had developed a rapport.
maybe that's what made Oldsmobile so good over the years,
See,
was some of that.
yeah, and the hourly guy got to be the teacher.
Mhm.
There's nothing better than being a teacher. The feeling.
Tell me about Dorschman a little bit.
Okay, Bob, let's see. Bob was definitely for quality of work life. He worked with us. I don't know that he had all the feelings for a quality of work life that I wished he had had, but he definitely had a lot of them.
Was he an old school manager then? Or?
Well, he was kind of what you might say one of the new breed, I would
Okay,
say.
all right.
I don't know that he would go out and talk with his employees there in product engineering like Bells did,
Okay.
or anything like that.
Okay.
But yes, Bob had a lot of good points. And of course, Bob was very good at the speaker table, and definitely well, we're in on a lot of programs. I'm sure this Quad 4 was one. I mean, certainly he had a lot to say about it. And of course, Ted Lucas, who I think is regarded as the father of the Quad 4.
Okay.
I mean, they had to get, his okays. He had to go in and discuss this with the chief engineer, and Dorsheimer was there. They must have thought well of him. They took him down to the corporation, and he worked on reorganization. However, anybody thinks about that, And where they I think, took the individuality that Oldsmobile division had, and the esprit de corps, and whatever. I think that was reduced by putting us all in a melting pot, or at least 3 divisions. Well, look at case in point. Cadillac broke away from that,
Yeah, changed sort of back.
and they've gone back to their own man. Why did they do that? We all have to ask us.
Right.
Why did they want to do that? Because they felt they could do what they had to do to get us back in the big car market. And by the way, they have a pretty good, Cadillac has a very good QWL2. They have done a lot of things in that area and did. And Targets of Excellence was another outshoot of quality of work, like I feel, and the need for it.
What is that program?
Targets of Excellence is getting better quality. Deming, see, I mean, we all can say, hey, if we had better quality, better quality, better quality. And we're trying to do that, but you don't obtain that overnight. You have to do a lot of stepping stone work.
And it doesn't happen just because you say it.
Right, and you can't do it. Yes, we had a lot of lip service, so I'm sorry to say. A lot of the problems were that many middle management wasn't sold. I think that GM quality of work life people would say they found that all over. The middle managers never had the right talks with the top people of how important this was to our future. I'm sure they had some, but it never got home. And I know that I personally tried to get some middle managers up to Black Lake, for instance, which is a wonderful experience. Per Ed Volt, our comptroller, and this Ed Sizor came in as a vice president. God, just thought the world. He said, we've got to get there. We've got to get there. That's all there is to it.
So we kind of ran aground in the middle of the organization.
Yes. Because the middle manager would be sold at it. Why? He'd go to Black Lake or something that would impress him, and he could see it. And finally, they found out that their future depended on getting people to work with one of their concepts, which now the managers are all taught that before they, I'm sure that if they aren't, then Stemple hasn't done his job. I'm sure he has. And because they need to know, and all levels need to know this message. And to listen, basically listen, get rid of some of these age-old we and they and families of Oldsmobile people. I've heard of them, 100 war stories. of how the father, would be on one side of the fence, so to speak. We gotta get rid of the fences, but I will use them here, was on one side of the fence. The, son was on the other. Both ways, you know. And, this bickering goes to the dinner table. And I maintain that the dinner table conversation is what this country has got to change, and GM has got to get. I wrote a letter to Smith before he retired. And we can all have ideas on that. But I said, we've got to get to the teenagers of this country, just like they got to do with AIDS and cigarette smoking. And we got to talk General Motors. We got to tell them, hey, when I grew up in a non-GM family. And I told Mr. Smith that in a letter, and that we need to come up with ideas. I had one that they, some guy head of relations called me on the phone and took 2 hours to tell me why they couldn't do it, and not in a very good manner. And that came down to a Chevrolet just wouldn't stand, I don't think would stand for it. Chevrolet.
Who's the corporation?
Yeah. You know, the little things that Wolfram put on the cars that said, I've had my 10th Oldsmobile. I wanted to expand that to families who the kid buys a Corvette, has a Corvette or a Chevy of some sort, and then he graduates in his age to a Cadillac. That happened time and time over the years in General Motors. We got to get to the front end of that line. Well, anyway, I had a way of doing it. It was just a simple idea, taking Wolfram's idea of on Oldsmobile, put them on anybody that had. I said I myself have had 19 that I can recall, and I probably missed a few. General Motors products, mainly Oldsmobiles because I came from Oldsmobile, but there were some Pontiacs and Chevys, and give the family that pin, an initial pin. Then I said, these teenagers, when you're taking them to basketball practice or whatever, or wherever, hey, Mr. Page, what's that? Well, I've had 19 General Motors cars and I'm proud of it. This guy came down to, they had something like that they were pursuing for the grill of a big expensive Corvette. And on the grill on the outside. And I said, well, now let me tell you, Mr. So-and-so, let me just say, I don't want anybody to know this on the outside of the car as they're calling. I said, first of all, they'll start taking them or whatever, but I don't really want them to know. I'd rather have it on the inside of the car where people ride with it and you can explain it. But out there on the grill, they see that you've had 19 Corvettes. You know, somebody thinks negative of that. And I might myself, I don't like any ornamentation on my car, ever. Whenever I go to buy an Oldsmobile or whatever, I tell Regency, you put that on there and you will take it off. I can tell you that. I won't take delivery of the car. Yeah. I don't like anything because we didn't design it that way. I'm probably prejudiced. We didn't design that with Regency holes on it or whatever. So I'm against that, but that's me. Anyway,
Yes, Bob, anything there that you think was
let's see. No, I think I've covered pretty well. Everything that I wrote down is coming to my mind in a couple of hours. I know there's many more that I have gone by. Hopefully your book is going to capture a lot of this.
covered your whole life history, so to speak?
Yeah.
And that's not possible, but
It's not possible,
as
yeah.
long as you feel that we've kind of gotten through the highlights and the major events, well, I think
Yeah.
that's.
I think what you and Helen are doing is all I can say is God bless.
Thank you. Gonna run it in the ground for the moment now?
I think we probably have.
Okay, shut this off, get you to sign your release. Be done.